Okay, the likely potato. This is last year's crop. So these potatoes only grow here in Likely. Wendy's preparing the garden over here. We're getting ready to plant them. So in 2007, a guy came over to our place for dinner named Grant. What was his last name?
Morrison.
Grant Morrison. And he brought these potatoes over, and he said these potatoes were growing wild at Cedar Point Park before the fur trade, which is prior to 1730. So he said you can cook them or save them or do whatever you want. So we saved them and we grew them the next year. I had 6 or 7 potatoes. We grew them the next year and we got a pound or so. And then the following year we grew them. I guess we got more than a pound because within a couple of years I grew over 300 pounds of these potatoes. Some were bigger, some were smaller. And I didn't think anything of them, but the cows came and got into them and they destroyed the patch of potatoes. And so I dug up all that were left, brought them home, and we saved them for the next year. So the following spring, I go out to the garden and I look at the garden, and there's some potatoes that are laying on top of the ground, and they got roots. It wasn't root like this, but they had long roots about 6 inches, about like this one, about 6 inches coming off them, and they had been sitting on the ground all winter, and they had froze solid. And I thought that was kind of weird. And then I had seen a blog that this lady wrote about her grandfather, A.C. Anderson. He was put in the trails for the gold rush. So I contacted her and asked her if she knew anything about potatoes growing out here in Likely before the fur trade. And she looked through her grandfather's books and couldn't find anything. But she said, do you mind if I send this email off to the curator of the Royal Museum? They're doing a study on Northwest potatoes right now, and I'm sure they would be really interested in this. And I said, sure, go ahead, I don't care. So she sent it off to the Royal Museum in Victoria. They got a hold of me, and I went down to see them, and they as soon as I opened the tobacco tin or the coffee tin that the potatoes were in, I could see it in the botanist Richard Hebla's the excitement of seeing them. And so I said to him, have you ever seen potatoes like this before? And he said no. And I said, well, what's different about them? And he said, one eye. Most of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but most of them only ever have one eye, where most potatoes have several eyes. And as you see here, this is just a random few out of the box. They only have one eye. So anyway, they did a study in Victoria on the potatoes, and they sent them to PEI where they do all the potato stuff. And in the meantime, they got a hold of me, and they said, you can't sell these potatoes as seed potatoes. You can sell them to somebody to eat, but they're not a recognized variety of potatoes, and you can't sell them to anybody as seed. And I went, oh yeah, okay, whatever. And so a couple years later, they did a study, and they realized that these potatoes only grow in the Likely area that they know of. Oh, yeah. Wendy's pulled a potato out of the ground. Does it have a root on it?
No root, but it was starting to right here.
It's starting to root. Now that's froze solid this winter. She's pulled it out of the garden, and it's starting to root. And so there you go. There's proof. So now they're a recognized potato. They're called the Likely potato, and we're just planting our garden for the year. So that's the story of the Likely potato. That's all.